This is All of It. I'm Allison Stewart. Let's talk about Gowanus. The Gowanus Canal was created in the mid-1800s from tidal wetlands and creeks. Now, for generations, it was a dumping ground for everything from industrial chemicals to sewage. Today, it's a federal Superfund site undergoing a massive redevelopment project. Over the past couple of decades, an onslaught of luxury housing and trendy restaurants have emerged. But before Gowanus became shorthand for Brooklyn transformation, it was a working-class Italian neighborhood. In his new memoir, Gowanus Crossing, A Brooklyn Boyhood, journalist Vincent Coppola takes us back to the Brooklyn of the 50s and 60s, back when kids treated the toxic canal as their playground, when the Catholic Church loomed large and organized crime was part of the backdrop of everyday life. Vincent has been a journalist for more than 30 years, and he joins me now to discuss the book and his memories of growing up in the neighborhood. Thanks for joining us.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
So what made you finally sit down, after being a journalist for so many years, what made you sit down and write a memoir?
Well, honestly, the canal is so polluted. And when I hit my 50s and early 60s, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And it lays you up. You don't know if you're going to live or die. It was throat cancer, and I'd never smoked a cigarette. So I traced it, at least in my mind, back to that pollution. And I had time on my hands. I didn't know how much time. And I started drifting back to a world that I was comfortable with, familiar with. And strangely enough, I missed it, and I wanted to try and recreate it. And that's what led to me writing the stories that became this book.
Would you mind reading a little bit from the prologue?
Sure. Brooklyn is a mythic place. Gowanus is its Nile, pestilent and fertile, forever reborn and reimagined. Mother to motherless Brooklyn's wanderers, poets, misfits, dreamers, junkies, and schemers, to the immigrant poor landed on its fatal shores. When I was growing up, no one would have mistaken the Gowanus for the Nile or any other living body of water. It was an open sewer, stagnant, reeking, sluggish, meandering from Butler Street, today's Borum Hill, through a graveyard of decayed 19th century repair facilities, industrial plants, abandoned warehouses, dying marine repair facilities, rotting docks. Its future already past. I played pirates on half-sunken barges, sought treasure among barrels of glittering industrial chemicals, climbed ladders and through hatches of gigantic, rusted marine diesel engines. I watched boats leaking fuel oil churn through the canal, crews desperate to escape the stench. And sometimes, in the light behind the John P. Carlson ink factory, I glimpsed men dumping medical waste and other unmentionable things into the glistening green water.
That was Vincent Coppola reading from his memoir, Gowanus Crossing, A Brooklyn Boyhood. Throughout the book, you describe the factories and the warehouses and the docks and even the polluted water with sort of a sense of wonder a little bit. What felt magical despite all these other issues?
Well, our culture, it was basically a peasant Italian rural culture dropped into this part of Brooklyn. And I was a bookish boy. I loved to read in a culture where really reading was not valued. My dad was a dock worker. Most of the men in the neighborhood were dock workers. And in those days, you made a living with your hands, sometimes your fists, but rarely your mind. And I was a bookish kid, and my dad, my uncles, big, husky Italian guys, would tell me Everything you know is in a book, as if there was something wrong with that. I think, therefore, I don't exist. And that was a world, but it did feed your imagination. And I had a great imagination, not so much to escape, because this was my world, but how many kids could play on rusting ships and, go into factories where there were chemicals spilled around and pretend you were a scientist or finding treasure. So it was a world that fueled a kid like me.
The church, the Catholic Church, is in this book. It's a lot in this book. What role did the church play in everyday life in Gowanus?
That's another question. Well, again, honestly, our government in Gowanus was really wise guys and the mafia. They were our role model. And I describe the neighborhood lovingly as a kind of a snow globe. And in that globe, on one side were wise guys, and on the other side was the church. And I went to Catholic school. I got a good education, but I was really beaten as a troublemaker, put in the back of the class because I got tired of saying the rosaries every day without feeling it. Um, and sure enough, as we now know, the head of the altar boys, a priest, was molesting kids left and right. And this went on for generations, and no one was ever the wiser. And when I wrote this book, I mean, to write this book, I had to go back through social media to dig out and find people and families. And one of the things they said to me when I mentioned that this priest had molested generations of young boys, I mean, as young as 7, they said to me, let the dead rest in peace. And, I'm a Newsweek reporter. The dead do not rest in peace in my world. I mean, I wanted to learn and find out and tell a story.
We're talking to Vincent Coppola about his new memoir, Gowanus Crossing, which looks at his growing up in northwestern part of Brooklyn in the 50s and the 60s. Hey, listeners, we want to hear from you. What do you remember about Gowanus and the surrounding neighborhoods? Maybe you grew up there. Maybe you remember the waterfront, the factories, the canal, the longshoremen. Or maybe you moved there more recently and have watched the neighborhood change firsthand. Our phone number is 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. Let's talk to Gio, who lives in Manhattan. Hey, Gio, thanks for calling all of it.
Hi, I'm calling from Manhattan. Vinny, congratulations on your book. I read your Gowanus Crossing blog. I love it. My family is from President Street. We had the stable on President Street. I know your family. I know your brothers, your mom, Gloria, with the red hair. Gowanus is a neighborhood of neighbors who watched out for each other. There were people doing heroin, in the neighborhood, but there were also people who would watch out for you. And that's what I remember most about the neighborhood. Just really wonderful neighbors, sit outside on beach chairs in the summertime, put the fire hydrant on, and, that's what we did. It was a beautiful place to grow up, and I'm really happy that some of my family still live in the house where my grandparents came many, many years ago.
Thank you so much for calling, Gio. Your family is at the heart of the story. Tell us about the Coppola family.
Well, what my former neighbor said is completely true. And when I was sick 15 years ago, I really craved that sense of community and neighborliness that was part and parcel. So it wasn't the end of the world, a dead end. It was lively, thriving, often funny, and people looked out for one another. So, yeah, my family, my mother's family, Giordano's, my great grandparents arrived on the Gowanus in the 1890s. So we were there forever. Uh, one of my great grandfather had 7 sons. And these were all bigger than life characters. My grandfather was a prize fighter. 2 other guys were wrestlers. 2 other guys became Fiorello LaGuardia's bodyguards. So this was an immigrant community that was really grabbing onto things and seeing what they could do with themselves. And I admired them so much. Uh, After time passed and that enthusiasm, I guess, kind of petered out. And instead of achieving, which I always wanted to do, we were kind of caught in the stagnation, and drugs, as she said, came in. My own brother was a heroin addict. Half my friends uh, died of drugs or drug related AIDS. So there was a tragedy that bothered me so much because these were good people and they didn't have opportunities. Nobody cared about us. That canal was polluted from the 1920s. And only when it began to gentrify, suddenly there was a move to clean it up and make it, the Venice of Brooklyn and all this malarkey. But we were trapped there. I was so isolated, and I'm not saying this negatively. I lived 3 subway stops from Lower Manhattan, and I didn't go to Central Park until I was 20 years old.
Wow.
That's how enclosed it was.
We got a text here that says, ask Vinny about the importance of stoop and stoop culture around Brooklyn at that time.
Soup?
Stoop. The stoop for the house.
I don't know where that's coming from, but food was
more
the
important
heart of our community. We were poor, but we were never broke. And to this day, my memories of the great meals, and we would have block parties outside, with hundreds of people, everybody cooking. And it was a great community. My grandparents, the Giordanos, every Sunday there would be 30 of us. And I had 35 first cousins living within 3 blocks of us. And we'd all eat outside on the sidewalk at a long table. And you can almost ask a passing driver to pass the food. It was that out in the open. And that world is really gone.
We're talking about his new memoir, Gowanus Crossing. I'm talking with journalist Vincent Coppola. You write about the racial tensions that emerged as Black and Puerto Rican families began to move into the area. How has your understanding of those dynamics changed over the years?
It wasn't just Black and Puerto Rican. It was such a closely knit, closed community. The strangest thing, there were projects where Blacks and Puerto Ricans were at odds with the Italians, and there were street gangs and all that. And Gowanus was known, if you lived there, not as Gowanus, but as South Brooklyn. So we were South Brooklyn boys. But anybody trying to come in was considered not a friend you haven't yet met, but a stranger. Harry Krishna's moved in the middle of all of this.
Tell me about that a little bit. I'm curious about that, the Hare Krishnas, how they moved in.
They just showed up, 30 of them, right in the middle of this Italian neighborhood among all the, restaurants and grocery stores and fruits vendors and bookies and this social club. And here comes 40 people. They could have come from a flying saucer, just dropped in the middle of it. And they were not really welcomed. I mean, they did the most outrageous thing you could have done. They took over an old convent. And this is still a very Catholic neighborhood, where women dress their kids in sackcloth on St. Francis's Day. And here come the Hare Krishnas, and the first thing they do is smash a statue that was in this convent and bring it outside and throw it in the backyard. They made enemies, as you can imagine, for forever.
I wanted to ask you
And
a
of
little bit about
course,
the
they were
Vietnam.
begging and, offending people left and right. But that was their world, and we had our world.
And talking about your world, let's talk about the Vietnam era. Was there a divide in values among the people who lived in Gowanus around Vietnam?
My father fought in the Pacific in extremely heavy combat. And I am convinced today that he had PTSD, no doubt, because his moods would vary from loving and gentle to rageful. Vietnam, strangely enough, well, some tiny percentage of all eligible young men during that era, maybe 7 or 17% were drafted. I would think in Gowanus it was more like 5% because, as I said earlier, that wasn't our government. And I had my uncles with these big burly policemen, and they'd always say, "College boy, when are you going to go in the army?" And my father would say, "Get away from my son," because he knew. So in one sense, he's this conservative guy, and on the other, he was cynical and he knew what war is like. So not many of my friends went to Vietnam. One of them, who I celebrate in a chapter, did go. He was an Italian immigrant, and he enlisted. And the rest of us were trying not to go. He enlisted, and sure enough, he died in Vietnam. And he's a chapter in my book. His name was Ernie Palmieri, and I won't ever forget him.
One last question. How did your training as a journalist help you write your memoir?
Well, a lot of these people, as I said earlier, I mean, they know me, they love me, they know my family. I had 3 other brothers, but I was always a kind of a troublemaker. And at first, they didn't want to, they thought I was going to like crucify the neighborhood and make them look dumb and angry and ugly. But after a while, I've lived in the South. I've been in every Southern town. I've done hundreds of interviews, a lot with poor people. And one of the people from my old neighborhood, one day she told me, "You've given me back my life." And that was the greatest compliment. That justifies the whole book. And it really justifies my life, that I could recreate a world that I really loved and had value to it. And I was up there a few weeks ago, on a book tour type thing. And I went back. And we mentioned streets were teeming with children, noise and food and fun and music. And now I go back to today's Gowanus with its high-rise buildings and garden clubs. It's dead silent. Dead silent. Is that an improvement? Not to me. And that's the world I missed and I tried to create. And I think I'm lucky enough to have recreated it.
The book is called Gowanus Crossing. It's by Vincent Coppola. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So a listener texted in about this segment. This will be my book about or set in New York City for our summer reading challenge. Yeah, we got a summer reading challenge here at All of It. We're challenging readers to read 6 different books in categories by Labor Day weekend. If you finish, you get a prize. You've got until July 4th to sign up. Head to WNYC.org/summer reading challenge to find out how to learn about all the categories. The categories are a book published in 2026, a book about the U.S. history or American historical fiction for the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, a book set in or written by an author from one of the 48 countries participating in the World Cup, or you can read a classic. Or you can read a work of genre fiction in fantasy, science fiction, romance, horror, mystery or thriller, or a book set in New York, like Gowanus Crossing. And a special bonus, the New York Public Library Summer Book Club selection is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. Go to wnyc.org/summer reading challenge for more details.